Hello and welcome. My name is Pat Gaddess, and today I am really delighted to be talking to Anne Maria about her book, The Little Goddess. So welcome, Anne Maria.
Hello, Pat. I'm really looking forward to it.
So let's get started with the first question. I am sure people will be intrigued to know, what was the inspiration for The Little Goddess?
Well, definitely the idea came from the real-life Jamila, who, just like her storybook counterpart, had a real thing about ancient Egypt and mummies in particular. And the story grew from that, really. One summer when we were all together, it would be fun to weave a story around her fascination, I thought. So that's how it started. And I remember writing the first chapter really quickly and reading it aloud to the family, sitting on our bed with them all gathered round. And from what I remember, it went down really well.
Your own interest in ancient Egypt started when you were quite young, didn't it?
Yes, it did. But it's hard to put my finger on exactly when. But I do remember really vividly as a child watching a programme on TV that speculated that the ancient Egyptians were in fact highly evolved beings from a distant star system, and this is why so many of them were depicted with long conical shaped heads, and why they had highly advanced technologies that had enabled them to build the pyramids and to understand the precession of the stars. And I remember how differently I felt about the world after seeing that. And that's how I've continued, really, knowing that there's a lot more to our history than is conventionally presented.
And your interest in ancient Egypt carried on until adulthood. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yes. But it wasn't until I read Anne Baring and Jules Cashford's marvellous book, The Myth of the Goddess, and the story of Isis and Osiris in particular, that my passion was really rekindled. And this just happened to coincide with Jamila's summer visit, but to be honest, I really can't remember which came first, which was the chicken and which was the egg, so to speak. I'd been working with these kind of stories for years, hadn't I? But I'd never written a story like The Little Goddess before, combining a huge myth like Isis and Osiris with the time-travelling adventures of an ordinary modern-day girl. But once I started, as you well know, I just couldn't leave it alone.
Jamila's adventure begins in the wake of an asthma attack at the British Museum. An interesting way to begin.
Yes. Well, when people faint, like Jamila does at the start, or when you have a general anaesthetic, consciousness changes, doesn't it? And we're whisked up and away into what we might call an altered state, like a dream. You are away with the fairies, people say, when we return to normality. And yet, whilst we are there, so to speak, the altered reality is the only reality. The asthma attack opens the door to the other world, and the silver pendant in the shape of the little goddess that is subsequently bought for Jamila by her sisters in the British Museum gift shop acts as what we might call in storytelling speak a talisman that allows her to consciously pass between the two dimensions. I love all kinds of magical stories, and I've always been fascinated by the way the characters pass from one realm to another, through magic mists, through the waters of a lake, east of the sun and west of the moon, quantum portals, if you like, into other realities that, whilst coexisting with our everyday world, utterly defy the laws of space and time as we know them to be. They're more like frequencies, like Jamila experiences quite directly when left alone in the temple. Frequencies we may become suddenly and unwittingly attuned to, like Alice in Wonderland, who is the only one in the garden to see the white rabbit rushing by, and through her curiosity is drawn into her own adventure down the rabbit hole.
Why did you decide to locate the story in the imaginary past of the Philae temple?
Philae lies at the centre of the myth of Isis and Osiris, and it's said to be where the goddess breathed new life into the heart of her lost beloved. And the story goes that the temple was erected in commemoration of this great wonder, and that thereafter it was renowned throughout the ancient world as a great temple of healing. I've mentioned elsewhere too just how breathtakingly beautiful the temple is. How the Victorians like Lucy Duff Gordon and Amelia Edwards called it the fairy temple of Egypt, and how it continues to enchant and enthrall travellers up to the present day. Before ever I went there in the flesh, Philae was at the core of my own enrapture with ancient Egypt, and even now as I speak, I get little tingles and the hairs on my arms stand on end, even though I've not been there for years. I think something like this happened to you too, didn't it, when we first visited the island?
Yes, it did.
There was one woman who travelled with us the first time, do you remember? She'd recently lost her husband, and yet we never knew until that day. And I'm fairly certain she had no idea of the temple's history or the stories associated with it. And yet, as we approached the island on our little boat, and as the iconic temple came magically into view, she just began to weep. Torrents of unexpected tears then streamed down her cheeks, and they did not stop until several handkerchiefs were sodden through. People sometimes speak of spirit of place, don't they? And my sense is that places dedicated to prayer over many centuries have a certain energy about them. They become sacred spaces, like the Greek temple of Asclepius, where the sick were invited to spend the night alone and next day to share any dreams they'd had with the priest or priestess, who would then help them to interpret the symbolism and create a healing protocol. To the ancients, of course, body and soul were one, a notion all but lost in modern medicine, and yet there is something powerfully enduring about the idea of communing with something greater than oneself in order to unravel a mystery.
Something along these lines happens to Jamila in the story, doesn't it?
Yeah, yes, definitely. And of course, Jamila is alone in the temple for many, many nights, during which time, and without spoiling the story, she does come face to face with her own fears and terror even, and she must somehow find a way through. But I don't want to say too much about that here.
There are several initiations in the story. Can you tell me why you feature them so prominently?
Well, initiation was the way wisdom was passed down the generations in the Western mystery traditions. But I imagine many young people understand it very well. and may in fact have direct experience of it in their own lives, because initiation happens quite naturally from time to time in the course of a normal life. Suddenly you know something from within. You're awakened to something, if you like, connected into something much deeper and greater than yourself, and from what you're able to deduce solely from the external environment. In contemporary terms, an initiation is a bit like getting an internet download, an internal internet download, yet from a vast collective pool or web of consciousness that transcends the limitations of space and linear time. Which is why, in Mia and Jamila's case, so very much is downloaded instantly, and afterwards they know everything they need to know in order to perform their roles. Even in Jamila's case, the words of the prayers and the melodies of the songs used to celebrate the rising sun.
That's an interesting way of putting it. And finally, what would you like the readers to take away from the story?
That's a brilliant question. Well, for a start, and despite the issues of distance and difference, there's a great bond between the sisters in both the ordinary and the extraordinary worlds. And, generally with sisters, it's worth remembering that beyond the difficult rivalry that very often exists, there's usually something much deeper going on between them, a purpose, if you like, maybe even existing before birth. The relationship of the sisters in The Little Goddess is certainly based on this kind of an idea, that it's no accident that people are born into the same family, and that they're somehow able to connect across vast differences of space and time, like Jamila and Mia, precisely because they have stuff to work out. They're drawn to each other. They have lessons to learn, mysteries to unravel, perils to face and overcome together. I hope very much that the story will encourage self-belief, trust in one's intuition and connectedness to a rich, multidimensional reality that's full of purpose and meaning and beauty, where everyone is significant and where everything counts in ways and in worlds beyond our wildest dreams. There's a lovely part at the very end of the story when, without again giving too much away, Jamila is given a precious reminder for the future. And I found these beautiful words in the myth of the goddess, and they're perfect for the story when they occur, and they're perfect for those who enjoy it to take away with them too. Soon you will leave our world, Jamila is told, but always remember you have the whole world within you, the sun, the moon, and the stars. And I love that.
So do I. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today and for giving us a little glimpse into the world of the Little Goddess.
It's my absolute pleasure.